The Galactic Academy's amphitheater buzzed with the excited chatter of over 300 students from 47 different species. Professor Zekthari, a distinguished Vorthon with crystalline skin that reflected the hall's bioluminescent lighting, stood at the podium adjusting his neural interface. Today's lecture on interspecies warfare and weakness exploitation had drawn one of the largest crowds in the Academy's history. The reason was simple. For the first time in the Academy's 2-century existence, a human was enrolled as a student. Marcus Chen sat in the middle section, acutely aware of the curious glances and whispered conversations surrounding him. His species had only made contact with the Galactic Federation 18 months ago, and their rapid integration into galactic society had been controversial. Some called humans adaptable. Others called them dangerous. Most simply called them unpredictable. "Settle down, class." Professor Zekthari's voice resonated through the hall's acoustic enhancers. Today we examine the fundamental weaknesses that define each species' approach to conflict. Understanding these limitations is crucial for both military strategists and diplomats. The professor's 6 eyes swept across the assembled students. The Krell, for instance, are magnificent warriors but suffer from hierarchical rigidity. Eliminate their commanding officer and entire battalions fall into chaos. Several Krell students shifted uncomfortably in their reinforced seats. The Etherian collective consciousness makes them nearly impossible to deceive, but they cannot function if isolated from their neural network. A few gasps escaped from the Etherian delegation, their translucent forms flickering with distress. Professor Zekthari continued methodically through the species represented in the hall. The Saurians' cold-blooded physiology made them sluggish in low temperatures. The Aquari couldn't survive more than 6 hours outside water-rich environments. The synthetic Nexus beings could be disabled by specific electromagnetic frequencies. With each revelation, more students began to look uncomfortable. These weren't abstract academic concepts. These were exploitable vulnerabilities that could mean the difference between victory and extinction in the harsh realities of galactic politics. "And now," the professor said, his crystalline features catching the light as he turned toward Marcus, "we come to our newest member of the galactic community. Tell me, Mr. Chen, what would you consider humanity's greatest weakness?" The amphitheater fell silent. Every student leaned forward, eager to hear what the human would reveal about his species' vulnerability. After all, humans had burst onto the galactic scene with an almost reckless boldness, establishing trade relationships and territorial claims with a speed that had alarmed many established powers. Marcus stood slowly, feeling the weight of hundreds of alien eyes upon him. He was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. "Professor," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall, "I think there might be a fundamental misunderstanding about the question you're asking." Professor Zekthari's primary eyes narrowed. "Please elaborate, Mr. Chen." "You're asking about our weakness as if it's separate from our strength, but for humans, they're the same thing." Marcus paused, scanning the confused faces around him. "Our greatest weakness is that we form emotional attachments to other beings, even those who aren't our own species. We can't help it. We'll adopt alien pets, befriend enemy soldiers, and risk everything to save strangers we've never met." A few students exchanged glances. This didn't sound like a weakness that could be exploited in warfare. Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "We have a human saying, 'No one fights more viciously than someone protecting what they love.' Our weakness, our compulsive need to form bonds, to care about others, becomes our greatest strength in conflict. Because when you threaten what we care about, we don't just fight to win. We fight like the entire universe depends on it." Professor Zekthari leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. "But surely this emotional attachment makes you vulnerable to manipulation, to having your feelings used against you?" "That's what most species assume," Marcus replied. "But here's what they don't understand. When you try to use our love against us, you're not just fighting us anymore. You're fighting everyone we've ever formed a bond with. Every species we've befriended. Every individual we've sworn to protect." The human student's eyes swept across the amphitheater. In the 18 months since contact, how many of your species have had positive interactions with humans? How many have we helped with problems, defended against aggressors, or simply shown kindness to when no one else would? A uncomfortable stirring rippled through the crowd. The truth was undeniable. Humans had already begun forming alliances and friendships across species lines at an unprecedented rate. So yes, Marcus said, his voice now carrying clearly to every corner of the hall. Our weakness is that we care too much. We love too easily. We form attachments too quickly. He paused, meeting Professor Zekthari's gaze directly. But that means if you attack humanity, you're not just declaring war on 3 billion humans. You're declaring war on everyone who has ever called a human friend. The silence that followed was deafening. Students began to shift uncomfortably as the implications sank in. In just 18 months, humans had already embedded themselves into dozens of societies, had already begun building the kind of vast informal alliance network that took most species centuries to develop. One by one, students began to quietly gather their belongings and slip out of the amphitheater. The Krell delegation left first, followed by the Etherians, then the Saurians. Within minutes, the hall was nearly empty. Professor Zekthari stood, alone at his podium, staring at the human student who remained seated calmly in the now empty amphitheater. Mr. Chen, the professor said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, I believe you may have just redefined what we mean by weakness in warfare. Marcus smiled and gathered his datapad. Sometimes the most dangerous thing about humans, Professor, is that we make it very easy to like us. As the human student walked toward the exit, Professor Zekthari realized that the Academy's course on exploiting species weaknesses might need a complete revision. After all, how do you fight an enemy whose greatest weakness is their ability to turn you into an ally? The empty amphitheater seemed to echo with a single, uncomfortable truth. Humanity's weakness wasn't a vulnerability to be exploited. It was a weapon they didn't even know they were using.